Welcome to the follow-up question. I'm your host, Michael Ashford. I've set out to uncover amazing and insightful stories by interviewing people from all different backgrounds and perspectives. But unlike other interview shows, only this show aims to also teach you what it means to listen more than you speak so that you can become a more thoughtful and informed person. I'm a former journalist who believes everyone has a story to tell, but we only discover those stories when we ask questions and listen. The more questions you're asking, the more you're listening. And the more you're listening, the more you realize we're really not so different after all. My goal is to get beneath the cliche answers to reveal the real nuggets of experiences, desires, dreams, and thoughts that make every person who they truly are. Welcome to the first episode of 2021 of the follow-up question. Thanks for your patience while I took a few weeks off to reset. I think we all needed it, and I appreciate all of you listening and coming back here in 2021. I've got a great show lined up for you today. I first ran into or came to know today's guest, Drew Davis, when I attended a virtual conference this year. It was actually called Content Marketing World, and Drew was one of the keynote speakers of this particular virtual conference. And his presentation was unlike any I had ever seen at a webinar or a presentation or online event. It was almost like I was watching a movie or a TV show in how it was produced and set up. I wasn't just watching a presenter click through and read from PowerPoint slides. I was watching someone weave a narrative and tell a story to get their message across to a virtual audience, which is incredibly difficult to do. Drew is a best-selling author. He's a keynote speaker, as I just mentioned. Before building and selling a thriving digital marketing agency, he actually produced for NBC and worked for the Muppets. We get into that a little bit. He's appeared in the New York Times and on the Today Show. He's crafted documentary films and content for tiny startups and Fortune 500 brands. We get into communication and the curiosity gap and what happens when we no longer have any questions to ask. Where does our curiosity go? Where does communication go when that occurs? This was such a fun interview, such an inspiring message from Drew, and I can't wait for you to listen. Enjoy this interview with Drew Davis. I want to read you something from a video that I was watching on your website that I had to write down. You said, we stop, and I'm paraphrasing, we stop paying attention when we have no more questions. And as a guy who has a podcast about asking questions, this certainly jumped off or jumped out of the screen or out of the speakers to me. But before I ask you the real question that I want to ask you that came up in my mind when I heard that, can you explain that? When we stop asking questions, we get bored. Can you explain that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it comes from a lot of research I did into why people pay attention, and I was really curious as to why people say they don't have any time to listen to a podcast, Michael. They don't have any time to watch my video series. They don't have time to read my email. Yet these very same people will go and sit down and binge watch 6 episodes of Bridgerton in a row, and I was like, this just doesn't add up. Like, why can people pay attention to a Netflix series for a whole Saturday, but they can't pay attention to my podcast or my email? And so I started diving in, and it turns out like your brain is constantly looking for answers to questions, and that's why you stay engaged. So if your brain has a question that it needs an answer to, it'll stay focused on whatever it is in front of you. And that's what entertainment does so well. I mean, if you watch Law and Order or any crime drama, it's like the most basic form of creating a question in your mind. Who committed the murder? Who committed the crime? And so as long as you're chasing that answer, you'll pay attention. And subconsciously, your brain wants an answer to every question. So, as soon as your brain says, nah, I got all the answers, or I don't need to hear anymore, or, I'm tuning out, you move on. And that's really what the crux of that quote is, which is, as soon as you don't have any more questions, we stop paying attention.
Might explain why true crime podcasts are so big then, right?
It's exactly why true crime podcasts are, I got sucked into a podcast about Chappaquiddick, the Ted Kennedy, kind of debacle. And I didn't plan on listening to much of it. A friend had sent it to me and said it was really good and I should try to listen to it. And so, out of an obligation to the friend, I hit play. And I found myself so engaged with the questions the podcast brought up that I would purposely get up from my desk and go for a 15-minute walk so I could listen to the next episode. That's exactly how powerful these questions can be. Your mind wants to get to the bottom of it. And your need for closure is so powerful, by the way, Michael. It'll force you to do things that are painful or uncomfortable. And there have been some psychological tests about this. Basically, some psychologists set up one of those interviews as a study in one of those, just I'm picturing one of those dark, fluorescently lit rooms with two-way mirrors, and they set up a bunch of pens on the table, and they would sit the subject down and say, we'll be back in just 5 minutes. Sorry, we're running a little behind. Don't mind the pens. Some of those pens, they were for a previous a test, and some of those pens will shock you. But anyway, we'll be right back. And these people wanted an answer to the simple question of which of these pens will shock you, that within 5 minutes, most people would sit down and actually click the pens to see which ones would leave a shock. And that's how powerful your need for closure is. So, if you can get people to ask a question in their mind, they will keep paying attention for as long as it takes for you to answer that question. It's nuanced, but anyway, that's the crux of it.
So then in hearing that answer and what you just said and going back to my initial thought when I heard that and watched that video, my question then, and where I really want to go with this is, do we have a curiosity problem in that we seek answers to confirm rather than to learn? In everything that you've dove into and the research that you've done and the talks that you've given, do you find that to be the case? Do we have a curiosity problem?
Yeah, I think Google, I'm going to blame everything on Google. I think Google and the internet in general has led to this immediate satiation of the answer to every question being there. So take, for example, if you're at dinner with a bunch of friends and somebody says, hey, remember that movie with so-and-so? I can't remember so-and-so's name, and they try to describe the movie and you're like, yeah, I remember that movie, but you also can't think of the actor's name. You will sit at that table while the conversation moves past that and still want to know that person's name. Well, before there was Google, you would just have to sweat through it, right? And your brain would work really hard to find that name. And that catharsis you feel when the name comes to you and you're like, yeah, oh, I got it. It was Matthew McConaughey. And you'll blurt it out in the middle of a conversation that's not related. And people are like, yes, that feels so good. Well, Google has changed all that. If that happens in a conversation today at dinner, you just pull out your phone, you look it up while the conversation's happening. You go, hey, it was Matthew McConaughey. And everybody goes, oh yeah, that's right. What year was that made? And you have a conversation about the Google result and you kind of move on. And I think, inviting people to go on a quest to find an answer to a question that Google can't answer is a really, really big opportunity. As a marketer, as a thinker, as someone who's looking for, new ways to think, because we kind of live in a world where the answers are there. If you want the answer, you can find the answer you're looking for. And that doesn't mean you're getting the best perspective or new insight. And I think the people that are really considered visionaries are the ones that are asking questions that no one's considered asking. And the answer isn't easy to find on Google.
Can curiosity be trained then? To go that next step deeper rather than the first result on Google? Can we train that in ourselves?
Oh, yeah. It starts with asking yourself the questions. If you pick, here's what I find when I'm surfing the internet is you can either find an article that really annoys you. By the way, all of this curiosity research started with a simple Google search on like what's the best length for a video on YouTube, right? And so I started reading all these articles, and there were literally millions of articles that all said essentially the same thing. It needs to be like 2 minutes and 34 seconds. That's the average view time for a video on YouTube. And like if you want to be successful, like 2 minutes and 30 seconds is perfect. And I was like, it made me angry. I was like, well, that's not true. Like I watch some videos, a minute in and I give up, and some videos I'll watch for an hour and 10 minutes and I'm still interested in watching, but I get thirsty and I get up and go get a drink and come back and watch the other hour of the same video. And I thought, this isn't the real answer to the question. And I'm asking the wrong question myself. The question I should be asking is, how is it that people can create content that people will watch for hours? And as soon as I went on that journey myself to find out how other people think through this, how do script writers write a script for Law and Order? How does a mystery writer create curiosity in the beginning of the book, and how do they keep it going for 400, 500 pages? That's when I started finding real answers. And so curiosity is trained out of you. When you're 2 years old, I mean, I don't know what age actually. When is it when kids are asking all those questions like, why is the sky blue?
As a father of two kids, it never ends, but
that's probably true. Yeah. So
probably teenagers. I don't have teenagers yet, but I assume the questions stop at the teenage years.
That might be right. I have a teenage niece who I see a lot, and she's stopped asking those questions. And she has an answer for everything. Sorry, Annabella. She's great. But I think as you get older, people cherish an answer to a question more than the question itself and the quest or the journey that it takes you on. And I think you only truly learn when you're willing to go on the journey yourself. And it's a long, arduous journey to find a really good answer to a question that no one else is asking. But it doesn't, and maybe people have answered it even other ways that you disagree with or find some hole in that you want to try to find a better answer to. But I think it's worth training yourself to figure out first what annoys you about the advice or insight or opinion or perspective that you're reading about, and go on a journey to find a better answer for yourself instead of just writing a mean comment or telling people this is stupid and moving on. And if you share the journey, I think, with other people that you're going on as it's happening, you don't have, if you form a hypothesis, it's just a hypothesis. Keep going on the journey, looking for a better answer, and you'll win more friends and bring more people on the journey with you. And you'll learn a lot along the way.
Drew, what did your journey then look like? You kind of detailed it a little bit at a high level, but I'd love to, what did you research? What did you go after? How did it start? I know there's 5 different questions in there that I just asked. But.
Well, my journey to answer any question starts with looking back first. I can tell you that as we're recording this, I do a lot of professional speaking, so I travel around speaking at events, and obviously with COVID, the last year everything's been virtual, and I pretty quickly realized that these virtual events could be or should be better. That was my opinion. And so I said, well, how, let me go on this journey. Let me ask Google, how should virtual events be better? What tips and tricks are out there? And all the tips and tricks I was reading, I felt like everybody was doing. And so it led me to the same conclusion. Well, hey, if everybody's doing these and this is the best advice out there, there must be a better way to think about virtual events. So the first thing I always do is look for the answer that's already out there. And then the second thing I do is look back to look forward. I'm a history buff. So I try to find out as much as I can about the evolution of something, when it was curiosity, I was like, what were the first mystery novels? Who started writing about mystery in the early days? What was interesting about those mysteries? That stuff isn't hard because I like that stuff. When it came to virtual events, I went back and found a guy who did one of the first webinars in 1997. And I called him up and we had a chat about what it was like back then and what he thinks has changed. And he said not much has changed since 1997. So the next question I have is, well, why haven't things changed since 1997? And I just, so I'm constantly asking the very next question without any regard for finding an answer. And sure, I have some hypotheses. Like I believe that maybe virtual events should be and webinars should be more like television shows, like a Super Bowl pregame show rather than a guy with a PowerPoint slide. But I didn't know why I thought that, but now I realize, very quickly that like the reason PowerPoint slides are big in every virtual event platform is because that's how it was invented in 1997 when we didn't have the bandwidth for video. So there's a reason the slides are big and the people are small, but we can do big video now. So, it was like, anyway, so the whole point is look back first. Bring yourself to today with a good knowledge of the history and evolution of whatever it is you're thinking about, and then start bringing it forward. What does it look like in the future? So right now, I just set up an interview with a guy who he tweeted something. Like I looked up on Twitter, Michael, this is a really long answer. I hope this is helpful.
No, this is great. I'm loving this.
I looked up on Twitter to see who was complaining about virtual events. So I just looked for virtual events suck. And the first result that came up was this guy was like, most virtual events suck, but I just went to a VR virtual event. So a virtual reality event, and it was awesome. So I tweeted him and said, hey, can I talk to you about that? Like, I want to know what that's like. So maybe that's what the future is like. And let me get some perspective, So you just got to keep asking the next question and be willing to go on the quest anywhere. When I think of a quest, it's like a long, arduous journey towards an end goal. My end goal right now is to figure out what should virtual events look like. But how I get there, like any good quest, is going to be weird. It's going to take twists and turns, and I'll get to a bog that I can't get through, and I've got to go backtrack a little bit. And I might see a dragon along the way, and I need a sword to kind of slay it. But at the end result is I learn a ton, and I'm able to really find a perspective for myself that feels unique and different, and then share that with the rest of the world.
What do you think keeps us from going on that long, arduous journey that you just said when we have something that we just don't simply know enough about?
I think just like any quest, it's fear of what's in the middle, not the end result. And I think people are scared to share what they learn because they think it may make them look naive or stupid. So for me, if you're not sharing what you're learning, the sharing process is actually really helpful. It helps you synthesize what you've seen and learned and heard. So even the conversation we're having right now, I've internalized a lot of these ideas, but I haven't expressed them that often to that many people. So this process is really informative, and hearing the questions that it brings up in other people's minds actually helps you take the next step on the journey. But people are scared to look dumb. I met a gentleman. I wrote a book called Town Inc., which is all about marketing cities and towns. And I met a gentleman from England who, really loved the book and loved this idea of going on a journey to figure out what his town could be known for. And his first question when we ended up chatting after the presentation was, I think I know what it is. I'm not exactly sure how to get there, and I don't know anything about this subject area. What should I do? And I said, well, just share your journey, your learning along the way. And he said, well, I don't want, there are a lot of people in my community that know about this, and I don't want to look dumb. And I think you only look dumb if you don't preface everything with everything you're working on with, hey, we're on a journey here, and I'm looking to learn, and this is what I've learned so far. And it'll invite people to teach you, hey, have you thought about this? Or who you should talk to, because it sounds like you're just the beginning of your quest. That's when you start getting the real insight. So I think people are scared of looking dumb or sounding stupid. And I think that the best quests are the ones that are all about naivete. In fact, what I wanted to write a book, actually. I have this title in my mind, Michael. It's called Too Stupid to Know Any Better. And it's basically about how the power of naivete can lead to the best and biggest innovations and revolutions and ideas. And that if you approach things that way, you're going to have a much better outcome. And I see this happen all the time now that I've been looking for it. People who came from an entirely different industry, knew nothing about industry A, all of a sudden show up in industry B, and within days or weeks or months, they're revolutionizing the business because they were too stupid to know any better. So go on the journey and don't be afraid to sound or look dumb.
I love that. Sign me up for that book when it releases.
You got it.
Do we overcomplicate communication then, in your view?
Yeah. I think it's trained into us. I mean, I think people are always want to talk to the smartest person in the room. They don't necessarily want to admit they're not the smartest person in the room. And I think it takes a lot of courage and confidence to ask good questions, Michael. And so I think, Lee, as someone who speaks a lot, after you've spoken at an event and people have learned a lot or love your session, they ask different questions and talk to you in a different way than before you speak. I'm not very well known in a lot of at a lot of events I go to. So my favorite time at an event is before I speak. And if I'm speaking at 4 p.m. in the afternoon, I like to go to lunch and meet people, and they don't know who I am. They don't know what I think. And I just ask questions and I get the best stories. But a lot of those stories and those conversations don't happen after I speak because I think people are nervous now to talk to me. And it's a real shame. I think we would all be better served if people were willing to, ask questions they think might sound dumb in the hopes that they'll learn something new to find the next good question.
Well, you're speaking to my heart there with that.
I know, right? It's all about the follow-up question.
I love it. Drew, how did you come to be where you're at now, where this is what you are focused on? These are the types of questions that you're asking. What initially sparked your interest to take your career down this path?
Well, I've always been a naturally curious person. But I always wanted to work in the television business. So I spent the first half of my career working in television and film. And I was always the person asking questions. Even for my very first job, I worked at a television station in Boston, and I wanted to know how everything worked. I mean, I was like a 5-year-old, like how does the teleprompter work? Like, how do the cameras work? Like, can I try operate the camera during the newscast tonight? Can I help with graphics? Can I write the news story? How do you write a news story? And, I think it could be pretty annoying to some of the people that work there. But, I think I've always been interested in asking questions. When I worked at the Jim Henson Company, I didn't know anything about marketing, and I was working on Bear in the Big Blue House. Do you remember that show?
Oh, yes.
Michael?
I definitely remember that show.
Yeah, it was a great show. And I had just been hired when they just started shooting Bear in the Big Blue House. And my job was actually to help manage the workshop where they made all the puppets for Sesame Street and the movies and for Bear in the Big Blue House and everything the Jim Henson Company did. And, I didn't have the most glorious job, actually. I worked with like 40 artists who all of a sudden I was in charge of the budget and the timeline. And so, I would have conversations like, why does it take so long to make a Miss Piggy head? And, why does it cost so much? And they would just say because it just does. Okay. But when I was there, I went to the very first meeting for Bear in the Big Blue House, and I had run the production budget for the workshop. And if I found out that we hadn't shot one episode of Bear in the Big Blue House yet, and we were already like $500,000 over budget.
Oh, wow.
And I was really nervous to go to this meeting with Sony executives and Disney executives and Jim Henson Company executives. And as everybody was going around the room in the production meeting, giving their status update, everybody seemed fine. And then they got to me, and Brian Henson says, "Hey, this is Andrew Davis. He's our new workshop production manager. Please give him a welcome. All right, Andrew, how are you doing?" And I'm like, "Wow, we're in big trouble. Like, $500,000 over budget." And he just said, "Well, that's okay. Like, keep us abreast of it." And they moved on. And I thought, wow, this is weird. So for 2 weeks, I asked, why do people not care that we're over budget? And I couldn't get an answer. Everybody was like, well, I don't know. The workshop's always just a bunch of artists and they spend whatever they spend and we can't fix it. And I went to a meeting with the two women who ran merchandising and licensing. So if you've ever bought a Big Bird doll, like that came from that team. And I asked the same question I've been asking for 2 weeks, like, why does no one care that we're over budget? And they said, well, look, if you don't create characters that people fall in love with, if Bear in the Big Blue House, you put like a budget constraint on creating Bear or the otter puppets, and they aren't lifelike and that kids won't fall in love with, we can't merchandise or license that product. So you cannot stifle their creativity. Here's the deal. If you get to like $2 or $3 million over budget, you should call me. And I was like, wow, okay, now I have an answer. I understand why this is going to work. And I think the journey of asking questions has always netted a better experience for me. And that's I'm not really telling you how I got here.
Well, I have a question in all of that, but I do want to say my favorite part of Bear in the Big Blue House was when the bear would throw his head up in the air, throw his head back, shake his belly back and forth and go, yay. So that's like the only thing I remember from that show, but I definitely remember it.
The puppeteer for Bear in the Big Blue House is a really good guy named Noel McNeil, and he's really talented. And Bear does, if anybody goes back and watches some YouTube clips, he does look and feel real. And it's a true testament to the talent of the artists I work with who could create something that, it magically transforms into a real talking bear that you just want to hug.
Why TV? You mentioned that you grew up, you actually wanted to get into TV. Why TV?
Yeah. I don't know. I grew up in South Africa, where we only had television, primetime television, basically, when I was growing up in the 70s and early 80s. And so, I think television was on from 3 to 7 p.m. And my mom would only let us watch 1 hour of television a week, so it all of a sudden made it this premium choice that I had to make. What am I going to watch this week? And the programming was pretty limited, to be honest. So sometimes I would just watch the news. Like that was an hour that I would, use up, even as a kid. And so when I got to the United States in the early 80s, and, at the time we had like 8 channels on our television and there was Knight Rider. My parents expanded it to 8 hours a week, not including PBS programming or the news. So we watched a ton of PBS. My brother and I would watch Sesame Street because it was free time, for us. We had to put a schedule together by Sunday night. And I think it's like when your parents don't let you eat ice cream or candy, all of a sudden, if you go to a friend's house, you just got to eat it all. And I just thought, man, this is like the pinnacle of entertainment. I want to be in this career. And the Jim Henson Company was ultimately my dream job. Even from a very young age, I wanted to work at the Jim Henson Company with the Muppets because of my Sesame Street experience. So, it kind of achieving that goal in my 20s was a real coup for me. But I learned also that it turned out to be a pretty crappy job, by the way, Michael. Like 2 years later, I left. And I don't have any regrets, but I also realized that, I need to not put so much stock in, finding like a job isn't going to be the answer to the rest of my career.
What was it like coming to the States from South Africa? What was that journey like for you?
It was, I mean, it was shaped by all the things I knew about America from television. We were moving to Texas, so I had this picture in my mind, even as a young kid, that I'd wear a cowboy hat and boots, and that we'd have horses, and I thought it was going to be like Bonanza. And Houston is not like that at all. My dad was in the oil business, so it was pretty, I think I was kind of shocked when I got there. There is a picture of me actually just after we moved to Houston in a cowboy hat and boots and a bolo tie, and I mean, I look pretty happy, but it was a big transition. I think it was a big change. I had been going to a preparatory school for boys called King Edward's in Africa, and it was very strict, and they believed in corporal punishment, and you had to wear a uniform. And so for me, school all of a sudden became kind of a free-for-all. Like I could wear whatever I want, and there didn't seem to be much discipline. And I was kind of a problem student. So, but eventually, I kind of pulled my act together when I found subjects I liked, like history and writing and things like that. And I was a swimmer. So, as I kind of made friends and found my way, I started really enjoying being a Texan. But I did leave as soon as I could leave Texas. I was like, I'm out.
To jump back to your career with the Jim Henson Company, you mentioned, it wasn't enjoyable. You left after 2 years, after what seemingly was, your dream job, as you said. This is a big question, but why was it not what you hoped it would be? And the stage or the process to go to where you are now, where you are talking about these things of communication and curiosity and tension and marketing, fill in that gap for me.
Yeah, sure. Well, so, the job at the Jim Henson Company was really challenging. I had been hired originally to help fix the budget problems that they had at the workshop. But the truth was, and you could tell from that very first meeting, the writing was on the wall that they didn't actually really want to fix the budget problem. And so I found myself in a position where I was personally responsible for helping fix the budget, but with no executives or support on actually fixing the budget. And that anytime you're in a predicament like that, it's just a dead end. I didn't realize it at the time. It took me 2 years to figure it out. But you just can't be successful in an environment like that. And the web was getting big at the end of the late 1990s, and it was the first .com revolution. And I had these friends that were working in television and film that were getting jobs as marketers, quote unquote, and they were getting paid like 4 times as much as me at the Jim Henson Company. And I would call them up and say, I heard you left TV and you're working in marketing. What do you do? And they're like, we don't really know, but we get paid a lot. I was like, wow, really? So I thought, well, I need to get out of television and find a better opportunity. And so the best thing that came out of the Jim Henson Company, by the way, was I met my wife, Elizabeth. So she happened to work there at the same time. Anyways, she had left before me. I left, and through a long succession of startup experiences, I started to realize that there isn't much difference between marketing and television. They both are designed to capture people's attention and inspire them to buy something they didn't know they needed. And as soon as I realized that, I thought, wow, marketing could be for me. I started an agency in 2001 with a journalist friend of mine named Jim Costco called Tipping Point Labs. And so, we knew nothing about building an agency, and we just started asking questions of our clients, of ourselves, what kind of content could we create. And so for 12 years, we built up this agency and, helping clients create content just the way the Jim Henson Company did that would inspire people to buy something they didn't know they needed. Not in a nefarious way, in a very honest way. Yeah. We wanted to believe in the products and make sure that they actually delivered on what they promised. And we had a great time doing it. And I mean, at the end of the day, when Tipping Point, we sold Tipping Point Labs in 2012, and I wanted to I wanted to kind of write a book about all the things we had learned and done. So I wrote a book called Brandscaping, and that kind of launched this next chapter of my career where people were inviting me to speak at events and talk about partnering with other brands to build your business, and asking me questions I didn't have answers to. So that started sending me on this new journey of, let me answer that question. It's a really good one, and I don't know how to answer it. So let's go on the journey to figure it out. So I do feel like everything kind of has always built on the previous step. And I think people don't realize how their entire body of experience is a learning experience that's designed to take you to the next step, no matter how bizarre the next step seems. And, so as a kid, I was a childhood actor, and I never thought I'd ever use that skill again. But now I'm on stages around the world using the skills I learned when I was, a kid. So yeah, does that explain how I got here, Michael?
It does. And to bring it to present day, then using those skills, how do we, whether professionally or in our relationships or just in our conversations that we have, how do we get people to be curious about our thoughts and vice versa?
Man, that is a great question. Because I don't know if I think the answer lies in the way we started this conversation. If you can inspire curiosity in the mind of the person you're conversing with, they'll start asking the questions. But I have a lot of conversations where, even with podcast hosts, where they're really eager to tell their story as part of an answer to a question they asked me, which is fine, but I think it's symptomatic of a lot of the conversations we have in real life, where we're not actually trying to spark curiosity in the mind of the person we're talking to. So if I kind of equate it to the experience I have when I'm at an event and people don't know who I am before the event, and I'm having these breakfast conversation with someone, I spend 90% of the time asking questions. And at some point, they're curious why I'm asking these questions or why I asked that question. And they start asking the questions. And all of a sudden that answer leads to a new question in the mind of that person. And now we're having a really interesting conversation. So I think the more you can think about creating a curiosity gap in the mind of the person you're talking to, the more successful you'll be in having a conversation that's more fruitful and more two-way than you ever expected.
Curiosity gap. Explain that. You just used that term. Explain. Yeah,
sorry. A curiosity gap is a void between what we know and what we want to know. So I'll just say it again. A curiosity gap is a void between what we know and what we want to know. And so if you're having a conversation with someone, it's a very basic conversation about, let's say you ask them, where are they from? If they say, I'm from Denver, you're like, oh, that's the end of the answer. But if you say, I'm from the orthopedic capital of the world, they go, wait, what? What is that? All of a sudden there's a void between what they know and what they want to know. They want to know, where is the orthopedic capital of the world? What the heck is the orthopedic capital of the world? Why is that more important than where you live? And that's when you spark a conversation and you start owning a corner of their mind, because the mind is firing off all the questions it needs an answer to. So, as soon as you understand the concept of a curiosity gap, it affects a lot of things. It affects the subject lines you write in an email to someone that won't respond. It's if you're going to send a text message and you want a conversation, not a one-word answer, it changes the way you send a text message. And if you're going to create a video or a podcast, it changes the way you tease the next segment or get people to keep watching all the way through 12 or 20 or 40 or 1 hour long shows.
As a guy who used to live in Texas, I'm sure you will appreciate this, but I often say that I am from the barbecue capital of the world, which is Kansas City, and I'll fight you on that. So
yeah, there you go. If you leave off the Kansas City in that answer, people will go, wait, where is that? And you can say, well, guess. And they'll say Houston and you'll be like, well, no, you might think that. Kansas City is a great barbecue hub, by the way.
My goodness.
So I fully support that claim that it's the barbecue capital of the world.
It's not a claim, Drew. It's a fact. So.
Perfect. I love it.
The concept of building tension in our conversations, I know that's something that you speak a lot about lately these days. My curiosity is piqued. Can we build tension too much to where we're just frustrated with each other's side and we're just going back and forth, not ever actually getting to the root of the conversation? Is that possible?
Yeah, but I think I'm talking about a different kind of tension.
Okay. Yeah.
Because like tension, the way I define tension, not attention. The way I define tension is the emotional anxiety we feel when there's an answer to a question that looming, like we don't know the answer yet. So, other people might think of tension as like anxiety in the conversation itself. Like you need to understand my perspective kind of tension, that leads to anger. But tension for me is just this emotional anxiety that's created when you create a curiosity gap. So, if you say, hey, I'm from the barbecue capital of the world, and I immediately want to know where that is, if you can string me along for 10, 15, 20 more seconds, my tension raises. I'm like, I just got to get the answer, Michael. Like, what is the answer? You're increasing the amount of attention that I'm paying to the conversation before you pay off with the answer. So I don't like to, tension is emotional in and of itself. And, you don't have to get people angry or upset or make them cry, with a sad story to create the emotional anxiety you need to earn their attention, their trust, or their expectation that we're going to have a powerful conversation. But it is about asking the right questions and ensuring that the answer leads them to the next question. And if you don't lead them to the follow-up question, Michael, ding, 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 you're shutting down the conversation before it gets started. And there's no curiosity there. And that's when, if you're at a cocktail hour, people are like, oh, that was great. Okay. You know what? I'll be right back. And then they never come back. That's a sure sign you kind of shut it down.
As a guy used to being in person, being on stage, what has this year been like, or the past year, I'll now say, what has this been like for you and your career?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's been really interesting. Given my television background, I spent a lot of time kind of rethinking what a virtual event should be. And so I have tried to deliver presentations that are much more like a television show. People say that it's like Alton Brown meets Bill Nye the Science Guy for marketing, or, that's so if you can picture that, that's kind of the show that I've tried to create when I'm doing a virtual presentation. And so that was a real challenge. And I've always said that a great job is one that's fun, challenging, and rewarding. So tick off the challenge box. It was really challenging to figure all that out and make it work. And refine it in a way that I think has been successful. It was fun in the early days figuring it out, but it's become less and less fun because I'm one of those people that really does thrive with a new idea and a new challenge. And has it been rewarding? I mean, financially, it's been fine, but I would say rewarding for me isn't just about the money. It's about like the fulfillment you get from the experience. Or the job, or the environment. And what virtual events have really lacked for me is the fulfillment factor. It's kind of, and I think it's because the interaction I have with everyone from the event producer to the audience is limited to, a Q&A session that's pushed through with chat, or watching the chat live as, like, I call it like a watch party where people are watching the session and chatting with each other. And what I don't get is the fulfillment from people, from hearing how or why that session has changed their perspective or what they're going to do with it. Or, so I will tell you, I did an 8 class 4 week, like course on how to write video scripts. And I found it really fulfilling, which I was surprised about because I got to know the students in the class. I got to hear their questions and then answer them the next week. I got to see progress on their scripts every single week for 4 weeks, and then see the final output. And all of a sudden I found it was the first virtual event I'd done that I really found fulfilling. So it's been a, kind of a roller coaster. I'm eager to get back in front of an audience. I did do a live event in Kentucky, actually in November. And it was different. But I'm still eager to get back to meeting people and having those curious conversations before and after an event in a way that really does provide me with the fulfillment I feel like I need. So that's a long answer to how fulfilling it isn't.
What do you hope we take away from what we've gone through over the last 10 to 12 months?
I think there are two things. I guess the first one is embrace the constraints, like not just for me, but I realized very quickly that, while I've been creating a video series on YouTube for 2 years, it kind of prepared me for a virtual event bonanza, right? Like, I think if I was forced to all of a sudden create an hour-long television show that felt like Bill Nye the Science Guy meets Alton Brown without that 2 years of experience, I would have been lost. And the idea of being kind of constrained to a camera and constrained to a desk and constrained to my house could be viewed as a terrible kind of disaster, or I could embrace the constraints and build a little studio here and really turn this into a real opportunity to flex my muscles that I haven't flexed in 20 years and really write scripts that excite me and, be creative in a way I never thought of being creative before. I was constrained to the neighborhood. And so, literally constrained to the neighborhood. So in one of my very first virtual events, I found an empty lot that had construction on it just around the way. And I decided to do a whole 7-minute segment, using grains of sand as an analogy for being found in the online world. And it was so much fun to be constrained to, instead of being well, I'm flying to Nevada next week, I'll just do it in Vegas. It's way better looking and it'll be fun. So embrace the constraints. And I've seen so many businesses embrace the constraints that it's been amazing. People that I think never thought they'd build an online business have found themselves having to build an online business very, very quickly because they've been constrained by no retail traffic, and forced to rethink what their business could be. So embrace the constraints and see them as an opportunity to come up with a new idea instead of just kind of a open field of potential and possibilities. Constraints actually force you to come up with something better and more creative faster. So that's number one. I think number two, when it comes to virtual events specifically, the year has culminated with me really challenging myself and the industry, and even technology providers to actually answer the question, what should a virtual event look like, and how can we make them better? And so that's the journey I'm still on, and I don't have an answer to the question, but I'm certainly trying to answer it. And I'm looking for any ideas. So if you have any, Michael, shoot them my way. If anyone's listening, and you've been to an amazing virtual event that did something really crazy or new or innovative, I want to hear about it. Because that's the only way I'm going to be able to help answer this question.
Well, before I ask my last question, how can people connect with you and reach out to you if they have those thoughts and ideas?
Yeah, you can. Well, you can find me on Instagram. I'm at Drew Davis here. I'm also at Drew Davis here on Twitter. And you can find my website is akadrewdavis.com. And at the bottom of every page, I think, is my cell phone number. So call me if you got a great idea. Just reach out, or my email address is there. You can find me there. So akadrewdavis.com or Drew Davis here on Instagram or Twitter.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Drew, what is a question that you wish you were asked more?
What is a question I wish I was asked more? I think that's a really, really good question. Do you ask all your guests this question, Michael?
I do, yes.
Should have been prepared for that. I think I wish people asked what inspires me. Because I think a lot of people lack inspiration and don't look for it in the most odd places. So, if you start asking anyone, like actually David Burkus, I think says, ask people what is his question? I think he says, ask people what they're interested in right now. I think that's a really great conversation starter. And I think it does invite people to share their passion in a way that that whatever they've been thinking about that day or that hour or this week invites them to share it. And I feel the same way. For me, inspiration is kind of a key to being successful. And if you don't feel inspired, or you feel stuck, or you feel hunkered down or locked down, or confined or constrained, looking for inspiration can open up just magnificent possibilities. So I actually spend probably an inordinate amount of time looking for inspiration in places I never thought I'd find it. And that's when I find the most fulfillment out of anything I'm doing. So yeah. I
gotta ask, what inspires you, man?
What inspires me? I think anything that forces me to question my prior knowledge, I find inspirational. So, I'm an avid reader. I listen to a lot of audiobooks, and I go for a lot of walks, and I find myself thinking of being inspired when I realize that I've been thinking X for a long time, and I just learned that Y might be the answer, or might be the truth, or might be more exciting to dive into. And so, I think for me, looking for inspiration outside of the stuff I'm always consuming is where I find the most excitement and enthusiasm. Like I'm reading a book called Redeemed, which is, I don't read a lot of fiction, and I read a lot of I read a lot of nonfiction, not fiction, and it's a fiction book set in World War I, and I've learned a ton. And I feel all of a sudden inspired to write a fiction book, I don't think I will, but it definitely got me excited. I started getting into choose your own adventure books, and realized that maybe I should write my next book, The Loyalty Loop, as a choose your own adventure book. So yeah, challenge yourself to read and consume things you never normally would. And I think you'll look for inspiration there.
Ah, beautiful, man. Beautiful. Drew, man, thank you so much for your time. This was phenomenal. I loved your answers. I was writing down notes as you were talking. I appreciate it so much. Thank you for the work that you do and for your time today, man.
Michael, thanks so much. This has been really fun. Stay curious.
Just one parting thought from today's conversation with Drew Davis. When we lead with our opinion, we crush the curiosity gap. When we are in a conversation or an argument or a debate and we lead with our opinion rather than asking questions, we remove all curiosity from the person on the other side. And instead, it's a back and forth argument that goes nowhere. Many thanks to Drew for sharing his story on the show today. Please do me, Andrew, a huge favor and share this episode with someone you know who might also find some value in listening to today's conversation. Share this episode with your network. Help spread the good word about the importance of asking more questions. And if you like the conversations that I have each week with amazing guests like Drew, then be sure to subscribe so that you never miss an episode. Subscribing also helps the show gain more reach, and that's a good thing. If you ever want to get in touch with me, you can always email me at michael@thefollowupquestion.com or go to thefollowupquestion.com and reach out there. I'll catch you on the next episode of The Follow-Up Question, and until then, keep asking questions.